Chapter 37, Section 3. So, beginning of September of 1939, war has broken out again. And the Allied powers were caught unprepared. You know, they were coming, they were in the midst of the Great Depression. The Allies will be Great Britain and France, and then later on the Soviet Union, and the United States joins in with them. The Axis powers, they're ready though. They had spent the first part of the 30s building up their militaries. The Axis powers were Germany, Italy, and Japan. So Germany is just overwhelming here in the beginning. They used something called Blitzkrieg or lightning war. And German planes would bomb cities and railroads and airfields. The planes would gun down soldiers and civilians with their machine guns. Armored tanks are rolling in and just wiping out defenses. Germany is going to crush Poland in only about 3 weeks. And by the time you get to 1940, Germany's overrun most of Western Europe. They've taken Poland in about 3 weeks. They've moved into France already and taken a whole bunch of France. They've gone through the Netherlands. They've gone through Belgium. Basically, the only place in Western Europe not taken was Britain. But Britain was being bombed pretty much every day. This is going to be called the Blitz. And the Prime Minister of Britain is a guy by the name of Winston Churchill. And they're going to fight back against the Blitz for 10 months. They shot down a lot of German planes. Hitler had planned on invading. He had planned on invading Britain, but he gives up that idea. And so Germany and Italy are conquering Europe, Southeast Europe. They're moving into North Africa. Out in the Pacific, Japan was conquering parts of Asia, places like China, down there into Southeast Asia. And Japan begins looking towards the United States. The United States, we had military bases in the Pacific. And on December 7th of 1941, Japan decides they can wait no longer and they got to try to stop us before we can stop them. And so December 7th, 1941, Japan sneak attacks us at Pearl Harbor, the U.S. naval base in Hawaii. This brought us into the war. Sneak attack, they destroyed a lot of our Pacific fleet. And so the next day, we declare war, and now we're a part of World War II. A lot of Latin America was brought into this war by them hitting us as well. So our entry into this war is huge. We're going to help defeat the Axis powers in Europe. We, the United States, we were the greatest industrial power in the world. Our factories could produce thousands of planes, tanks, ships, everything you need for a war. Hitler decides that he is done being allied with the Soviet Union. He wants the Soviets' resources. He had never intended to be honest with the Soviet Union. He was just trying to hold them off in the beginning. And so in 1941, Hitler attacks the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union's huge, though. It's going to take a long time to attack the Soviet Union. And the winters are bitter cold. The Russians, they're not just going to give up their country. The Soviets even used something called scorched earth. This idea that as they retreated, they burnt their cities. They destroyed their own crops. They blew up dams that provided electricity. They want to make sure if they had to leave it behind, the Nazis weren't going to get it. The Russians suffer tremendous losses. But the tide turned in 1943 in Stalingrad. The Red Army, as the Russians were known, the Soviets were known, is going to surround the Germans. This causes the Germans to surrender in Stalingrad. When this surrender happens, the Soviets begin pushing the Germans back out of the Soviet Union. And by the time you get to 43, the Allies are driving the Germans from North Africa, and they're starting to push into and invade Italy. This will bring us to 1944. 1944, the Allies are going to invade across the English Channel from Britain a place called Normandy. And they will be led by General Dwight D. Eisenhower. He was a U.S. general, and he leads this Normandy invasion. Okay, so they built up in England and Great Britain, and they're going to cross over into Normandy. And so on June 6th of 1944, you have what's known as D-Day. And approximately 155,000 soldiers land at the beaches of Normandy. Another 2 million will land after this initial invasion. By the time you get to August, Paris has been retaken from the Nazis. And it's time to start moving east. It's time to start moving towards Germany. The Germans were now between the Soviets invading from one direction and the other Allies invading from the other direction. And in April of 1945, the Allied forces are going to join together at the Elbe River in Germany. And Hitler will kill himself in April of 45. April 30th. Hitler is dead. May 7th, Germany surrenders. And on May 8th is VE Day, Victory in Europe. The war in Europe is officially over. But World War II is not over. Because out in the Pacific, you still had Japan. You had the war in the Pacific, you had the war in Asia. Japan had been winning everywhere. The Philippines and other islands. In Indochina, a whole bunch more in Southeast Asia, they had been winning. But in June of 42, the war had turned at the island of Midway. Japan decided they had to hit us again. They had missed our aircraft carriers in Hawaii, and this great sea and air battle at Midway stopped them from hitting us again. And this battle changes the war in the Pacific into the favor of the Allies. And for the next 3 years, we're going to hop from island to island, making our way towards Japan. The president, by the time you get into April, May, into the summer of 45, the president was Harry Truman. FDR had died. Harry Truman doesn't want to invade Japan. We had seen the amount of deaths had been caused on those remote islands. We knew if we invaded Japan, you'd have over 1 million casualties, U.S. and British. And so he chooses to use a brand new weapon. The atomic bomb had been invented by us, and we're going to use it on Japan. And on August 6th of 1945, at Hiroshima, we dropped the world's first atomic bomb, killed around 100,000 people, Thousands more will die later from radiation poisoning, but Japan did not surrender. 3 days later, on August 9th, we drop a second one on Nagasaki. Japan has had enough, and on August 14th, 1945, Japan surrenders, and the peace treaty will be signed on September 2nd, 1945, aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. World War II was now over. But as the Allies had crossed through Europe, they had discovered concentration camps. Camps where Germans kept those that they saw as enemies. And we discover that there was a genocide against Jews and others. Genocide is the mass murder of an entire people. Hitler's genocide against the Jews was called the Holocaust. It's not the first genocide. There had been other genocides. But this is the most well known. This is the most horrific of the genocides. Hitler built camps literally to try to kill the Jews faster. And they had gas chambers and cremation ovens. And people were sent there via cattle cars. 6 million Jews die in the Holocaust. 1.5 million were kids under the age of 6. And Jews weren't the only ones killed, though. Gypsies, mentally ill, Slavs, homosexuals. All in all, about 10 million die in the Holocaust. Allied soldiers had died at the hands of the Japanese in the Pacific, too. And you're going to see trials for the Axis leaders. They were going to be held responsible for what they had done during this war. As far as the results of World War II, the one thing you will see is you'll see the League of Nations go away. It was ineffective, obviously. And you're going to see the United Nations created, very similar to the League, but with a little more power. It was created in 1945 by 50 nations. Still around today. Its job was trying to prevent war, lending money for poor countries, producing medical care and education in poor countries. You're going to see Germany get divided into 4 different zones. Us, Great Britain, France, and the Soviet Union, we all get a different part of Germany to try to fix and rebuild so it's not like the old Germany. Berlin was divided. Berlin was the capital. It's entirely in that Soviet zone, that red one there. But if you look in the bottom right, that little puzzle piece looking thing down there, that's actually Berlin divided up. And we each got a part of that as well. Japan will be occupied by us for about 7 years. General Douglas MacArthur was going to lead Japan. Japan becomes a democracy. Under our leadership, Japan gives women the right to vote. Unions were allowed in Japan. People were given the land. The Japanese economy is going to start to grow into the massive economy that it is today.